Escape from Tarkov is in a weird position right now. Wipe after wipe, it seems like we lose more and more players, and the problem is only getting worse. With all these brand new extraction shooters coming out and seeing success, the future of Tarkov seems to be up in the air right now. For a game that exploded into popularity just a few years ago to now averaging around 8 to 10k viewers on Twitch, it really makes me wonder what happened. So, I thought we'd take a step back into the past and really analyze what made this game great at its peak, and also what's the cause of the downfall that we're seeing right now. Chapter 1. The history. Now, this isn't going to be a deep dive into every step of this game's history. There's a ton of videos of that already on YouTube. I mostly just want to cover 3 topics in this chapter. What is Tarkov at its core? Why do people enjoy it? And how did it explode into popularity? Tarkov at its core is simply an extraction shooter. You load into a raid with all the gear you decided to bring in, and you either survive that raid and come out with whatever you looted, or you die and lose everything. At its core, this feeling of risk to reward is what Tarkov really is. It's the driving factor behind every mechanic in the game, and that feeling of adrenaline or anxiety you get whenever you're engaged with another player is something that you just don't get with many other games. And this is what makes Tarkov so great, and this is what brought in so many new players. But the question is, why do people enjoy Tarkov? The answer to that is very simple. One reason is what we just talked about, and it's the risk to reward and the adrenaline from fights. That feeling of coming out on top after winning a 1v1 or even winning a fight against a team of 2, 3, or 4 other players is simply unmatched, especially if you're at a major disadvantage with the gear that you have. But that's not the only thing that makes this game great. See, not only is this game an extraction shooter, it's also a looter shooter. And one thing about people is that they love shiny things. And in Tarkov, there are many shiny things to be had and a lot of loot to be had. People want loot, and they want all of the best loot. So, if there's a location on a map that has all of the best loot, you're pretty much guaranteed to find other players there. They want it, and so do you. So now you have players who all want the same thing and are willing to risk it all in order to get that loot. Risk and reward. We've come full circle. Now that we have an understanding of what Tarkov is and why people enjoy it, let's take a look at what made this game explode in popularity around the end of 2019. Instead of sitting here explaining everything word by word, I figured the best way to get my point across is to have a visualization of a few examples of what made this game so appealing back then. And I think the best way to do that is to watch an old landmark video from that time period. Now, we're not going to watch the whole video because it's almost 40 minutes long. If you'd like to see it for yourself, I will leave a link down in the description below. But I do want to play a few clips and give you guys some perspective on it. The first thing I want to point out is the title of this video itself. 8.47 million ruble, full labs white, 268 kilograms of loot. We touched earlier on loot, but I think I need to explain it a little better. Loot is almost the entire point of this game. Everyone loves loot and everyone wants loot, and they also want as much loot as possible. Coming out of raid extremely overweight, carrying an absolute ton of loot is what everyone wants to do, and that's what this video portrays perfectly. Back then, you could go into raids with thick cases, item cases, and weapon cases, meaning you could leave a raid with a ridiculous amount of loot. So let's see what that looked like.
Keep it coming. Got a ton of space. All these rigs, man. Side packs.
I'm dropping all the one plotters.
Oh, it's fucking raining loot on me. Make it fucking rain. All right, I'm 268 kilos.
Since then, the ability to bring in cases to raid has been completely removed, meaning that a super fun way to play the game around the end of a wipe is completely gone. The next thing I want to point out is movement. Take a look at how his PMC moves around normally and also how he moves around when he's carrying a bunch of heavy loot.
One dead. 2 dead.
To the staircase that we spawned at.
Okay, I'm coming over to you. I killed the 2 guys that I initially saw.
Nice. From above me or?
Yeah, I'm coming from gonna be down the hall, basically.
Back then, inertia and the weight system were not in the game yet, which we will touch on later, but not having those systems in place made it to where you could completely prioritize loot and come out with as much as you wanted to. Nowadays, you pick up one fuel can and your PMC has to crawl to extract because he's too overweight and can't regain stamina while walking. Which brings us to the next chapter. Chapter 2. Major changes to the game. The glory days of late 2019 and early 2020 did not last long at all. For whatever reason, through the game's explosion in popularity, the devs decided to start making changes to the game that they thought would increase its realism. First up on the board was the weight system, and that was added sometime in early 2020. The devs thought that being able to run around with 100 kilograms of loot as if you were carrying nothing was a load of baloney, so they decided to introduce the weight system. This was the first major turning point of the game that we had ever seen. There had been a lot of changes prior, but nothing as significant as this. You see, on one side of the argument, you had players who liked the weight system because they wanted the game to be as realistic as possible. On the other hand, you had players who just wanted a video game to be a video game and to be able to have as much fun as possible being loot goblins. This change completely split the player base, and this change also was bad enough that a large portion of the player base quit playing the game, some of which have probably never returned to play again. Then came the rats. Around the same time that the weight system was introduced, a video was released that would completely change the dynamic of how people played the game. A YouTuber that you may have heard of named General Sam released a video showcasing the rat strategy. In this video, he showed people how to rat an extract camp, and it went absolutely viral within the community. And with that, the rat was born. The game had now transformed from people PvPing, fighting, and moving around the map to an all-out Chad versus rat war. You see, before this, the players who weren't that great at the game had to just suffer and die repeatedly in an attempt to become a Chad one day. Now they had the option to become a rat and adopt a playstyle that would help them be successful and make a lot of rubles. At the same time, ratting was not really a big deal as it was somewhat easy to counter. But as the years have gone by, rats have evolved into something that we never could have imagined. Nowadays, most raids you play, you will probably encounter someone who just prefers to sit and make absolutely no noise, waiting for someone like you to walk by for the easy kill. I actually ran an experiment and tried out ratting for the first time, and it was definitely an eye-opening experience. I'll leave a link in the top right-hand corner of the video if you want to check it out. Next came inertia, and this was an even bigger issue than the weight system. Inertia made Tarkov feel like a completely different game, and it was especially bad when it was first released because the effects of it were way overboard. If the weight system was not enough to make certain players quit the game, inertia definitely was the last straw for them. Just like the weight system, a lot of players quit Tarkov when inertia dropped, and I would argue that even more of them definitely never returned to play again. The final major changes that are slowly causing this game to die is the introduction of Arena PvE and the Unheard Edition drama. The only thing I have to say about Arena and PvE is that they simply split the player base even more. As of right now, I'd be willing to bet that there are more players playing PvE than there are PvP. Most of the casual player base simply do not have time to grind out every single wipe and then lose everything on wipe day, so PvE makes a lot of sense to them. But basically, that means that a lot of players have left PvP and have caused the game to lose even more players in theory. The last major change I want to talk about is, of course, the Unheard Edition drama. I don't want to get super in depth with this because a lot happened, but essentially, BSG released a new edition of the game called Unheard, and it would cost you a whopping $250 to purchase. This edition introduced a lot of pay-to-win features, and this in turn really upset the community. Everyone and their mother basically went on strike trying to cancel BSG, and BSG essentially said,
"We do not care."
Eventually, a compromise came about, but this was still not enough to satisfy the thousands of angry players who felt betrayed. BSG had promised EOD players that they would never have to pay for anything again, and when they saw they had to pay for Unheard Edition, this did not sit well with a lot of players. This, in my opinion, was the final straw for a lot of people, and Unheard Edition drama is, in my opinion, the biggest reason why this game seems so dead today. Raids seem lifeless, The game averages 8 to 10k viewers on Twitch, opposed to the hundreds of thousands it saw during its rise to popularity in 2019, and it just feels like there is no future for this game. Chapter 3, the current state of the game. The way this game feels right now is just rough. Armor feels useless for you, but feels extremely tanky for other players. High tier bullets feel like they do absolutely nothing, and players are eating 16 rounds of M855A1 because the arm hitboxes act like extra armor for some reason. Wow, 16 hit count!
What?
Bro, 16 hit count with 855A1. How the fuck is this dude alive? And the gameplay loop just feels super stale and super boring. With each wipe we get new content, but after a few weeks, everything just goes to feeling bleh. The game used to feel like it rewarded you for bringing in high tier gear because it gave you a better chance of survival. Now, because of the neck hitbox, it does not matter what gear you bring in. You can be one-tapped by basically any bullet in the game. The game seems as if it caters way more to the rat playstyle that I mentioned earlier and not towards the players who want to PvP. PvP nowadays is not rewarding. There really aren't any hotspots on the maps anymore that brings players together. And if there are hotspots like that, the loot there is really not worth fighting for anyways. It seems every wipe, the loot just gets more and more nerfed, making the raids seem extremely boring. If the PvP is not rewarding, the loot sucks, and the quests are the same old boring quests that we've done over and over again, what's the point in even playing this game anymore? Well, I personally don't believe in criticizing something without offering solutions, so here's what I think would help bring this game back to its former glory. Chapter 4, what can we do to fix the game? In reality, there's nothing we can do. It's totally up to the devs. But let's just say in a fairy tale world that the devs watched my video and came to me for solutions on how to revive the game to what it used to be. Here's what I would propose, and it's actually pretty simple. I would tell the devs to go back to late 2019 and very carefully analyze the game during that time. We all know that those were the glory days of Tarkov, and that's when it saw the most amount of growth. So really think about what made the game so good during that time period, that more and more players were buying the game. Here's a few things that come to mind. No wait system and no inertia system. Insane loot spawns in key rooms and around the maps. PvP was rewarding. Fighting other players was the main focus of the game. Bringing in cases to do insane loot runs was a lot of fun and gave us something to do at the end of a wipe. Viewer kits for streamers was a great way to build your community. Being able to give away rare items such as red keycard to your community, if you were a streamer, of course. And finally, the PKO6 was a great optic. Why the f did we nerf the PKO6? I don't get it. And those are just a few things that I can think of off the top of my head. Now, I know a lot of you may disagree with some of those things and would argue that some of those changes were necessary to the health of the game. And that's totally okay. This is just my opinion, and you are welcome to have yours also. But there is no denying that the game was much more full of life and way more popular back then than it is right now. So, what do we do? To be honest with you, I do not have an answer to that question. As much as I hate to admit it, playing Tarkov these days feels like a chore rather than an enjoyable hobby. Everything I talked about earlier are common occurrences during every play session I have these days. The game just feels rough. I'm not really sure what the future holds for Tarkov, but I think it has definitely been trending in the wrong direction for the last few years. Who knows how everything will turn out.